name's Peter Parfitt, and in the next few minutes I'm going to show you a few extra things you can do with your domino jointers rather than just using them with the standard dominoes. I am, for example, going to show you how, using the DF700 domino, you can easily make the recesses required for a mortise lock. I'm going to show you how easy it is also to make a very clean, neat hole for the key in a mortise lock. I'll show you a simple jig that I've made which makes the setting of hinges in the door and the door frame a breeze. I'm also going to talk to you about extra wide dominoes which I've used on this gate. I'm going to remind you about the importance of having a reference block for each of your dominoes so that you can plan your joints, and also you can use it to help design any jigs that you may need. Now this particular jig, I've used it to set up this cut here for the mortise lock. I've also used it to do the hinge cuts. And this is also the same jig that I've used to make the extra wide slots needed for the extra large dominoes that I've used in the gate. So all of that's coming up in the next few minutes. Right, in this next part I'm going to show you how easy it is to use a Domino 500 to set hinges into a door and into a frame. And for the purpose of this demo, I've got here part of a frame of a door that I'm going to put in, believe it or not, a garden shed. But it's going to be a proper door, proper frame, proper hinges, and so it's perfect to illustrate what we're up to. Now the very first thing for you to understand is this jig that I've made up, and I'm going to show you this in more detail now. The main component of the jig is this piece of oak, which is 50 centimetres long, it's 6 centimetres across and 25 millimetres deep. And through the centre is a channel which is 7 millimetres deep and 22 millimetres wide. And that channel is for the two sliding stops which dictate the left and right movement of the domino. At the front I've got a pair of stops which allows you to set the jig flush with the piece of wood where the hinge is going to be set. Now in order to hold these sliders in position, I've set in some of these screw inserts, one there and one there, and these are very cheap. You get them in England from a company called Screwfix, and you just drill a 8.5 millimetre hole and you screw them in using an Allen key. Now the sliders are made from a piece of maple, and this was the original piece of stock I used, and it's 22 millimetres across by 25 millimetres deep. And I started by cutting an 8 millimetre groove about 10 millimetres deep in both ends, and I just put it through the router table and got a nice central groove like so. Having had my two grooves, one at each end here, I then set about cutting this to shape. And the way I started was with one like this. I took a Forstner bit and drilled a hole just here, which is for that curve, and then on the bandsaw I made that cut, and I ended up with that shape, which I then smoothed off using my Rotex 90 sander. So that's the two sliders made, but you do need to know where to position the screw inserts so that you've got the maximum flexibility with the jig. And what I did was, I said to myself, well, the very smallest hinge that I would want to cut would be perhaps 19 millimetres, which is what a domino bit width would be in its narrow fitting. So therefore, the narrowest that I could contemplate would be these two stops right up against the side of the domino. I then said, well, what's the widest? And actually the widest that I would do with this is probably about 7 inches. Well, I've never seen a 7-inch hinge, but certainly it would allow me to do 3 and 4-inch hinges, which are the most popular sizes. So from that I was able then to put a pencil mark there, and then drill the holes for these screw inserts. And that's really how we worked out how to make the jig. The next thing to know is how to set these sliders so that you get the right width for your particular hinge. That is dead simple. You should have a centre line already on your jig. Now we also need to mark this line on the left and that one on the right, and that's done very simply by lining up your domino on that centre line with its crosshair spot on, and then we mark the left and the right hand edges of the domino base plate, and you end up with those two lines, and they should be 132 millimeters apart. Now that figure is exactly the same whether it's the DF500 or the DF700 domino. So with those marked, we're now able to set it up for a particular cut. Now you might be using it for a hinge or for an extra wide domino. In my case, I'll set it up for this hinge. This hinge is 100 millimeters wide. I've already put into my DF500 a 6 millimeter cutter. So I need to find out what the width of a standard cut with a 6 millimeter cutter is for this DF500. And it's 19 millimeters. So I take 19 away from 100 and I end up with 81. I divide that by 2, which is 40.5, and I then position my stops so that they are exactly 40.5 and 40.5, and then tighten the screws. Now let's just make sure the domino is set up properly before we begin. I've got my width of cut set at narrow. I've got my depth of cut set at 28 millimeters, which matches this hinge. If you wanted to go deeper than that, you could use the DF700 domino, but because the standard slots are of different widths with the DF700, you'd need to recalculate where your left and right stops go. The important setting to get right with both this domino and the DF700 is the height of the cut. Now our jig is 25 millimeters deep. We want to cut a 3 millimeter channel in the workpiece below. So with a 6 millimeter cutter, we're going to have to cut into our jig by a little bit, as well as into the workpiece. And that will mean a setting here of 25 millimeters. So we end up with a 3 millimeter channel in the workpiece and a 3 millimeter cut into our jig, but that doesn't matter. And I've now fixed it to my workpiece with the clamps. And I've got my centre line of the jig on the centre line of where I want the hinge to go. Anyway, so there we go, it's all set up, and remember that you can't use the domino just like a router and slide it along. You've got to do a series of plunge cuts. So here we go. There's my slot. Now at this stage, because the cutter on the domino is circular, there is a circular bit here, and I would have to clean that out with a chisel. But I think you can see already that that is almost exactly where I want this hinge to go. So just 2 little quick chops with a chisel and I'm done. And there we go, ready for the next one. And that is very quick and simple. One could use a router, of course, and most people do, but the only thing I would suggest is that when you're working at a door frame which is in situ, it is far easier to do domino cuts like that than it is to control a router in some form of jig or whatever. And I think this is an easier tool to use.